Right now, I've got the pleasure to introduce Catherine Hein. Catherine is here to speak with us about the role of communication in the workplace. Catherine is a senior process engineer for AMEC in the Oil Sands Business Unit, and her current role is focused on modular design in steam-assisted gravity drainage within the In Situ group. We all know how to communicate, but if good communication is not mastered, it can lead to misunderstandings in the workplace that can waste time, energy, and resources. Please join me in welcoming Catherine to the podium.
So, communication is something that everybody does every day, so you'd think we'd all be experts. Unfortunately, not. Professional communication just adds another level where you have to get over a technical idea or a complex theory and give you a message that's not just simple, but very detailed. So, the reason that you run into so many issues is interpretation. So, being an engineer, I had to start with definitions and terminology because that's the first. So I'll run through some definitions. I'll run through some basic concepts of how your thinking impacts communication and different types of communication. I'll give you some personal stories, and then we'll start kind of breaking down the types of parts of communication and how to analyze your own communication style so that you can start to figure out what your style is and maybe why that's causing a problem when you're trying to deal with someone else who might have a different style. And then we'll talk about some of the common barriers or issues that women run into. So, what is communication? So, the Merriam-Webster dictionary had a really good engineering worded term. Process by which information is exchanged between individuals using common symbols and behaviors. Now, symbols and language are usually pretty easy to define. You can write it down, everybody can write it, everybody can agree, yep, that's what the term means. Now, what about behaviors? That's a little more complicated. That's where the human factor starts coming in. So behavior is how you conduct yourself. Pretty broad term, doesn't give you a lot to go on. So everybody understands that your behavior is going to be impacted by you as an individual. It's going to be how you express yourself. It's going to be based on your beliefs, experiences you've had, things that have molded you. Now, how does that work once you get to an office? Obviously, for everybody to communicate well, everybody has to figure out a way to communicate that everybody can understand and everybody can accept. So that's where you start running into issues. So thinking. The first part of deciding how you behave is you have to think about it. So thinking is broken down into two parts. Your first reaction, your gut reaction, is your instinctive behavior. So your first, as soon as you see something, as soon as you hear something, as soon as you smell something, your brain starts reacting. It gives you an immediate reaction. Sometimes that's a good reaction, sometimes it's not. Fight or flight syndrome, so that person you hear coming down the office and you cringe because you just don't want to have to talk to them, that's not always a great reaction to have at work. So unfortunately, it's not till after you get through that part that your brain actually kicks in and starts doing cognitive thinking. So that's where reason, logic, all the engineering parts come in. So that's when you start to actually think about facts and how you should react opposed to how your gut wants you to react. So that's where you've got to use a little more discipline. It tends to be less emotional. You're using your procedures, you're using a common framework that you're using at work. So that's usually the part that you need to use at work. So the two different types of communication is reactive. Reactive is when you just go with your gut. You use your instincts. You don't worry about getting to the second part of your thinking. You just blurt out whatever comes into your mouth. Doesn't always work so well. Sometimes management doesn't appreciate what your gut reaction says. So Usually the goal is to get to proactive. You want to actually think about what you're saying first. You want to stop, take a breath, make sure what you're saying is appropriate, make sure you're not yelling at somebody because you're upset, make sure it's a reasonable response. So the difference is the sequence of events. Reactive, something happens. You just go with your feeling, you immediately react, then you think about it later. Usually there's some regret. Sometimes there's a little bit of a learning there. Whereas the proactive is when you stop and think about it first and decide whether you should use that gut reaction or whether you should plan out something a little bit different. And then hopefully after the action, you're still going to go through the thinking, review it, decide if it worked or not. But you want to do the thinking before you speak. So work appropriate behavior is always the tricky part. Especially with women, we have some added obstacles, especially if we're dealing with a room full of men, which tends to happen. You're the only woman in the room. All the guys can be a little different in their style. So you need to be aware of the culture. So every office is going to have a slightly different culture. What's acceptable, what's the norm, what people are thinking they're going to hear from you versus what you may want to say. So part of that is deciding whether you fit the norm and whether you're comfortable with the norm. So sometimes you can help with it, changing it, sometimes you can't. So that's the first step, is deciding if you're comfortable and you can work within that environment and within that culture. So the next is you need to be aware of what message are you sending out. So every time you speak or do something, you're promoting yourself, you're creating a personal image. So every time you talk to someone, are you helping your professional image or are you hurting it? So you need to be careful with what you do and what you say and how you say it so that you make sure that you're building relationships and not hurting them as you go. So everyone needs to kind of take some time and think about what is it you want your personal image to be. So if you're not conscious of it, then when you're creating a message and developing something that you're going to tell someone, you need to know what kind of message you're trying to create. So my personal professional image is I try to stay as genuine as I can. I'm not a good actor. Most engineers aren't. I can't be two different people at home and at work. I grew up as the oldest sibling. I'm bossy. I'm naturally bossy. I tell people what to do anytime I think I know what they should do. So happens at work. My siblings will say, yeah, it does. Happens at home. So being assertive. You need to make sure that you're able to speak up for yourself. You don't want to be pushy, but you don't want to sit back in the corner and not be heard. The only way managers will know you're there is if you're willing to speak up and be assertive. The other one is confident. So a lot of times that's the tricky one. There's a lot of issues and a lot of women have self-confidence and body image issues, and your work, your home life might not have encouraged you to be confident. There's a lot of reasons you may not be. So a lot of times that's about building yourself up, telling yourself you can do things, and just going ahead and doing it. So, kind of skipped ahead. So the main one is believe in yourself. Try to surround yourself with people that also believe in you and that you believe in them so that you can encourage each other. The other one is be willing to be noticed. If you never speak up, the manager won't know who you are except for that lady that sits in the back row all the time. So be willing to say something, be willing to take a risk and have them look at you and take note of who you are. And if all else fails, just act as confident as you can, and pretty soon you're going to start to feel more confident. It'll just become part of who you are. So, as far as my personal story, there's a lot of books and things that give you advice on how to build confidence and how to embrace your natural things and how your childhood impacts your life and all those kinds of things. So when I started writing the speech, I kind of stopped and did a little bit of reflecting, because a lot of it comes back to how you were raised and what you believe. So I went back and looked and realized, hey, my mom did a pretty good job. She really encouraged us to be our own person, to go with, she really promoted doing your own thing, being willing to speak up, and she really gave us a lot of encouragement to just be whoever we wanted to be and try things. So, as a child, I was very chatty. My mom has lots of stories where I was only 2 or 3 and I would wander away because I was bored of talking to her and wanted to go talk to somebody new. So I would wander off. So she has horror stories of trying to find me in campgrounds where suddenly I wasn't playing on with the rocks and dirt sticks anymore. I was 3 campsites away talking to an elderly couple. So a lot of that was just a natural inclination. But fortunately for me, my mom encouraged it. So I was encouraged and able to do a lot of sports and group activities and other things that help with building your skills. They teach you teamwork, they teach you how to work with other people, they teach you how to follow direction and how to build up other people as well as yourself. So I was able to try a lot of different events. I tried figure skating, I tried gymnastics, I tried ringette, which was before hockey for girls. So a few of you might have played. I played softball. I played on several of the teams at school. I did dance lessons, I did singing, I did pretty much anything I asked if I could try it. My parents were good about saying, yeah, sure, go for it. So a lot of these teach really good discipline for having to get up and go to practice early. They teach you a lot of very valuable skills. They also teach you to be competitive. So as much as you want to be a team player at work, you have to remember you're also competing, that if someone else is better at promoting themselves to management, they're going to get a promotion before you will because the manager remembers their name and remembers them when they have a spot to fill. So you need to remember that as much as you need to work together, you still need to make sure you're noticed. So another issue that came up was speaking in public. A lot of people have a fear. I do, and I still do. I still get nervous. But it was something that my mom felt was very important. So early on, she used whatever forum was around to try to help us with learning to do it. So we quite often had to go up and read passages at church or speak at other family events just to get practice. So the best thing you can do is confront the fear. Go and sign up for something like Toastmasters, join a volunteer group and say that you'll speak at a meeting and give people an update. Find a situation where you're comfortable talking to the people just to force yourself to do it. So the more you do it, the less you fear it. And worst case, you screw up and oh well, everyone laughs. That's usually the worst that can happen. So another way I had to learn to deal with that was work. So as a teenager, I worked in a family business. So my grandfather owned a restaurant. Started out in the kitchen. That's good. Except for I quickly learned the waitresses make better money and they don't have to clean as many things. So I'd much rather be a waitress, thanks. So I moved out front. Well, guess what? You got to talk to people. You have to talk to whoever sits down at the table, whether you want to talk to them or not. So you learn a little bit of public speaking with the role. You have to be pleasant, you have to be polite. Doesn't matter what they say, you still have to be pleasant and be polite. So some of that reactive versus cognitive thinking and biting your tongue sometimes comes into play and can be very important. So I've tried to always go with things that pushed myself to build on my confidence and build on my skills and get over any fears or issues that I had so that I became more confident talking to people. So, communication. So there's lots of studies, there's lots of psychologists, there's lots of people that have written books and theories and papers on communication. So the easiest ones to understand are the ones I'm going to talk about. So Albert I can never say the name, Merbrian broke down communication into 3 parts. So anytime you're giving a message and communicating in person, there's 3 parts. Verbal, which is usually the part we focus on, is actually the smallest component. That's only 7% of the total message. So the bigger parts are vocal and visual. So those are the parts that people remember after. So they might forget everything you said, but they might remember what jacket you were wearing or what color your dress was. So you have to be careful that you know and remember to address all three issues when you're preparing a presentation or a speech or a meeting with a manager. You need to think about all three. So, the verbal component's usually pretty easy. Sometimes it's just the words you use, making sure you're using the right terminology. In engineering, that actually can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. Most offices are pretty multicultural. Our office, I think I'm about the only person that actually grew up here in southern Alberta. So sometimes what I think is a fairly straightforward, easy terminology, some of the guys that have grown up overseas and English is a second or third language, the terminology can be a bit of a stumbling block. And then you run into jargon. Every company has their abbreviations, their terms. They might be used for your industry, they might just be used for your company. So you've got to watch out for all those little tricks and things that can catch people and confuse them. So try to keep your message simple. Try to always use the most straightforward wording you can so that you're least likely to confuse people. And if someone has a question, just assume it's their understanding, not your words that were the issue, and just go with it. So vocal. Vocal is how you say something. So a lot of times for women, the issue is volume. If you're sitting in a big boardroom with 20 other guys and you're trying to get your point across, if you don't have a good, clear voice that can carry, they might not hear you. So make sure you're working on using a good, firm tone. Make sure you project your voice out. Make sure they can hear it on the other side of the room, and no matter where they're sitting. Or all else fails, make sure you have a microphone. So the biggest trick with vocal is trying to remember that your posture and how you feel and everything is going to impact it. So usually the biggest thing is, if you can, stand up. As soon as you stand up, you open your body up. It gives your alignment a bit of a boost. So if you can, stand up to make your point or make your presentation. It'll immediately help. If not, make sure you sit up, make sure you take deep breaths, try to relax, and things will usually flow more smoothly then. So visual. So visual's the most memorable part. And unfortunately, visual's the part you're gonna get judged on first. So as soon as you walk into the room, someone's gonna start to judge you. They're gonna look at how you're dressed, how you're standing, who you're standing beside, everything. They're gonna be judging you. Whether they mean to or not, you do it. So make sure you're aware. Just think about things like your body, your posture, so things like that you don't wanna convey a message unintentionally. So watch for nervous tics or fidgeting, things like that could make it obvious to someone that you are nervous. Try to smooth those out. The other one is go ahead and make your personal appearance personal. Use accessories, but remember, you want them to remember what you said and who you were more than just what you wore. So be a little bit careful. Sometimes an outfit can get a little loud. So the other part of the visual is manners. So I personally know a lot of guys that hate it when they shake someone's hand and they get a limp handshake. So make sure you have a good, firm handshake and practice. If you need to, go to church, go to a club, just walk up to your friends and say, hey, I need to practice. Do I have a good handshake? Is this firm? Did I overdo it? Don't try and crush somebody's fingers, but don't do the little finger thing. Give a proper handshake. Some cultures it's not acceptable. Generally, here it is. Most people are pretty open to handshakes. The other one is when you're introduced to someone, try to repeat their name back to them. It'll help you remember their name. It'll also help the person feel acknowledged and that you heard them and that you're making a point of trying to see who they are and remember who they are. So if they're introduced a certain way, make sure you repeat the name the same way. Don't change it without asking. So then we come to the tricky part, interpretation. So even once you think through all of these things, even if you try to make sure your message is clear and concise, you work on your tone, you work on your appearance, there's still an interpretation. The message you're trying to send might not be the one that they're getting. So unfortunately, you can't do anything about it. Once you send the message, it's up to the other people to interpret. You can't change the other person. So all you can do is do your best and then go from there. And that's where their personal experiences are going to start to color things. So then all you can do is go back to the think and try to analyze the message you sent. So another useful tool is making sure that you know what communication style you're using. So Dr. William Moulton Marston was a very interesting man, actually. I've done some reading on him because he's come up several times in several different courses I've been in. So he was a psychologist, but he was also an inventor. He was a lawyer, he was a feminist, and he also was a comic book writer. So, interesting note, he wrote Wonder Woman. So he was an interesting man that came up with a lot of great inventions that are still used today, such as the lie detector. So he came up with a communication theory, and it was based on behavior. It wasn't based on personality type, it was just based on communication style based on your behavior. So it's also it's non-judgmental. It's just based on facts. It's not to say one style is better, one style is bad, or one style can't be used. It's just, these were the styles, and this is how he broke down communication and the different ways that people approached it and what he could observe. So he broke down communication into 4 different styles: dominance, influence, support, and compliance. So the 4 styles simplistically are just in a quadrant with 2 axes. One axis is how direct you are versus whether you're very indirect. One is whether you're focused on people or tasks. So it's a pretty simple system that most people can grasp, and most people can do a basic analysis. So that's what we're gonna. You can do much more detailed analysis where it gives you gradients and graphs and breaks down subgroups of each of the quadrants, but to do those, you need to go online, you need to spend some time. There's lots of great systems that you can look at. They can give you lots of interesting information. But in the simplest terms, you can just do some really basic word tests. So everyone, if they want to, will just do the simplest test I've ever come up with that I did in a training course was just word pairs. So all you do is look at each set of word pairs, and then at the bottom, count up how many of the ones in the D column you used. So this is a measure of how direct versus indirect you are. So I'll just leave it for a minute. So if you want to just write down how many D's you ended up with, that gives you a measure of, on the scale. So then the next set of word pairs is on whether you're people-focused or task-focused. So again, all you do is look at the word pair, go with your first answer, and at the end, count up how many of the ones in the T column you've said apply to you. So this is the most simple model for Marston's 4 styles. So all it is a gradient. So your D, the higher your D number, the further off to the right you are. So if you're a 5 and you were exactly halfway, then you're right in the middle. If you had 8, 9, 10, then it puts you further and further over to the right. Now, your T for your task focused puts you further up the vertical. So if you're a 5, again, you're right in the middle, which means you're a very well-balanced person. I'd like to be you. And if you have higher T, then the higher up you go. So this will give you what quadrant you fall into. So this is just your predominant, the highest ranked one that you have. So it gives you a very simple model to give you a very one dimension of. So each of these styles has a bit of a catchphrase that kind of helps you define or understand that personality. So D, for the dominance one, you tend to be get it done. You tend to be the person going, now's the deadline, now's the date, is it done? I want it today, I need it tomorrow. You're very focused on getting something finished, getting the task done on time, and you just want to get things finished. You're very business-like, you're very direct, you're to the point. So the next one down is, I was going to say, that's the influence. So those are the people that want to be part of the team. They want to build up everyone. They want to make sure everybody knows that everybody did a good job. They want to make sure that everybody knows they were part of that team and helped get that goal done. They want you to say thank you. They really want everyone to feel part of the team. So over to the left is the supportive. So those are the people that they want everyone to get along. They don't want there to be conflict. They want everybody to be on the same page. They want to make sure everybody was working towards a common goal and everybody knows the plan. And the last one in the upper left is the conscientious or compliance. So that's the get it right people. They're maybe not so worried about if it got done on time, but they know it's 100%, that everything is correct, it's completely done. You followed all the procedures, you did all the checklists, and everything's, nobody will find any faults with it. It's right. So, knowing where you fit on each of these can kind of help you analyze what your style is. And all it can do is you can look at what that style's strengths are as well as what the weaknesses are. So once you have an idea of where you're falling, you can kind of then take a step back and try to look at whether you're fitting that mold and maybe whether that's working at work. So dominance people tend to be very focused, very direct, can be some other types can consider you insensitive. I happen to be very high D, so I get, you can tend to be very focused on getting results. Sometimes you're not getting at 100%, but 80% is good enough. Just get it done on time. So you can have very high standards. You usually like to be in control. You want to be telling people what to do. So there's some good qualities there that help with leadership. You can also have some faults with, other people not taking things in the best light, and you can sometimes get a little overwhelmed trying to do too much. So influence. Influence people are often very creative. They're great to have on a team. They help energize and keep everybody going. They're good at working with other people. They're very friendly. They're often really good when you have to change things that oh, that's okay, we'll just do it. Everybody will be fine with it. So as long as they feel like everybody's working together, it's all good, no matter what happens. So some of the weaknesses are that they can get distracted, that sometimes they're a little too focused on the people and not the work. So they can sometimes also procrastinate. If they don't think everybody knows what's going on and everybody's not working together, they can put things off, wanting to align. So supportive, again, they tend to be very people-focused. They can be quite indirect, but they're often very agreeable, very friendly. They want to help everyone. They want to make sure everybody knows what's going on. They're usually very good listeners, so if you need someone to talk to, you probably are going to see someone who's a supportive person, and that's usually your person that you go talk to when you have an issue. So they can often be very emotional at work, which can sometimes be a strength or a weakness, depends what's going on. And the last one, compliance. So again, they tend to be very task-focused. They tend to be very dependable, very detail-oriented. They tend to want to follow a system. They want procedures. They want checklists. They want step-by-step. They want to make sure everything's following in order. Some of the weaknesses are they don't tend to like change. When you deviate from that procedure, they're usually not really happy. And again, they like everything to be right. It might be late, but at least it's right. So they can be the perfectionist on the team, the person that wants to make sure it's 100% and doesn't want anybody to see it till it's there. So once you've figured out which category you fall under, the other thing is to think about whether you're actually using just reactive engineering or reactive, or whether you're being proactive. So once you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, then you can think about whether you're actually making the best use of those strengths or if you're letting those weaknesses dominate. And then you need to make sure that, like I said, when you're developing a communication message, whether it's a speech or whether it's you've got a list of things you need to talk to the manager about, are you remembering to use all three parts? So, what happens when communication doesn't go well? Well, it's usually because you're having some sort of clash or some sort of conflict between different communication styles. So, if someone's a high D and someone's a high I, who tend to be people-focused versus task-focused, they don't always see eye to eye. There can be a disconnect between what the one person is saying and what the other person wants to hear. So the main way you can try to work through these understandings are try to make sure your contact is personal as much as you can. It's really easy to send an email. It's easy to just leave a voicemail. Try to go talk to the person. Then you can use all three of the V's. You're getting verbal, you're getting vocal, and visual. That then if the person starts to misinterpret, you can watch for what the reaction is, and you can try to adjust your message or customize it to the situation. The other thing is plan. Try to have a plan. If you know you've had problems dealing with that person in the past, try to plan for your next conversation so that hopefully you're calm and you know what you want to say and how you want to say it before you get there. The other one is the tricky one, listen. That's usually the hardest part, is you need to be able to stop and listen and try to figure out what that person is saying and why you're having the issue. Is it because they're not hearing your message? Is it because you're not using words that they understand? Are they not understanding what your goal is? What is it they're not hearing? And when you need to just ask them questions. So try to ask open-ended questions to get as much feedback from the person as you can. I know that's a bad one that lots of times you'll just ask someone, so do you understand? Do you agree? And they go, yeah, sure. And you take that as a yes and you go. That you need to ask an open-ended question saying, can you repeat back to me what you're planning to do about this for the next week? And see if they really are on the same page as you. And see if they repeat back the same tasks you thought you told them to do. Or if their understanding is that they're doing something completely different, which unfortunately happens. So when you're going through this, you need to make sure that your goal and your objective is very clear. So when you're talking to them, make sure that they understand what your goal is, and you need to make sure that they have the same goal. If they have a different goal, you're probably not going to get to the same place. The other one is, if you can, try to be flexible. Try to adapt how you're communicating to fit the other person. So if the other person is your direct opposite for style, you might have to rethink how you approach them to fit what they want to hear and how they want to communicate. Worst case, if your conversation is going really badly, sometimes the best thing to do is just walk away and say, we both need to think about this, let's try again tomorrow, and just give yourself a break. Sometimes stopping and not trying to push through a conversation is safer and gives you more time to think through how it was going and why it's not going well. So if you are going to try to adapt, there's lots of documents you can get that'll give you clues or give you hints for how to deal with someone if you've figured out that they're a certain style. So someone who's a D, they want you to schedule a time. They don't want you to just show up because they're probably busy. They want you to get to the point. They don't want to talk about their weekend. They want you to get to the point and tell them, why are you there? What are you going to do? What's your goal? How are you going to get it done? And stay focused. So they might want to chat after, but when you first show up, they just want you to get work done and get to the bottom line. So the main thing to do with them is make sure you're clear on what it is they want and they need, and that you're aligned. Now, if you're trying to communicate with someone that's an I, the influence person, they want you to let them talk. They also want examples. They want you to explain exactly what it is that they're doing, how they're part of the team, how they're contributing. So if you're, say, someone like me who tends to be a D, you need to give them a little more details. It's not just, please do this for tomorrow. You need to go in, make sure they have an example, make sure they understand why you want it, make sure they understand it's part of a bigger plan, that they want to see how this all fits. So, S, the supportive person. So this communication style, you need to come in and be a little more casual, a little more sincere, a little more personable. Direct opposite from the D. They actually want to chat about how their weekend went first. They want to make sure that you're friendly. They want to feel like they have the relationship with you first. Then they'll get down to business. Then you can worry about setting a goal and what it is you need them to do. But first they want to make sure that as people, you've connected. And lastly, the compliance or the conscientious person. So again, this person tends to be task focused. So again, they're very organized. They want you to schedule a time. They want you to have all the details and make sure you know exactly what it is you're talking about. This is the person you want to send things before you go talk to them so they know exactly what you're talking about. They want step by step. So if it's a procedure you're discussing, make sure they have the procedure, that you're both looking at the same revision of it. They want you to use facts, logic, and just make sure you're talking about something very detailed. So don't go in disorganized. Make sure you've got everything planned out ahead of time. If you show up on the fly, they're going to get really frustrated. So even once you've done all these things, there's lots of people that have great advice. So there's all kinds of stories and books that you can read about other people's situations and things that have worked, things that haven't worked, and lots of great examples of what not to do. So one of the ones that I've found very entertaining and sometimes unfortunately truthful is Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. So it breaks down common things that people do, women especially, that can actually hinder. So things like wearing something overly loud and girly to work and sending a message of being a girl. You want to come across as confident, mature, a woman. You want to come across as a professional. You don't want to come across as somebody's younger sister. So there's lots of examples of, and it's written in a very easy to read style. It's broken down by little stories that show an illustration of how a certain role applies or doesn't apply. So it's very interesting. So some of her, the author's main points are being willing to speak up. You need to be willing to ask questions. You need to be willing to be noticed. You need to be willing to volunteer for things. You need to make sure management has seen and heard you, that you're not going to get a promotion or a raise if they can't even figure out who you are. So be willing to be visible. Another interesting one that again is broken down with lots of stories and anecdotes that will make you cringe is play like a man, win like a woman. So this author's main goal or main focus is try to be who you are, but make sure you're aware of what's going on at work. Work can be very competitive. Yes, you need to be part of a team, but you're also competing with coworkers for positions and opportunities. And there's a lot of things that if you're not aware of, you can mess up unintentionally. So one of her biggest ones that I found very interesting was gender bender words. So words that people hear and guys interpret differently than women. So it was really interesting to see. So a lot of it comes down to make sure when someone gives you an answer, you fully understand their answer. Don't make too many assumptions. So one of her biggest ones is women, when they hear no, quite often take it as an absolute no, never. And they never bring the topic up again. So if you've requested a training, say you want to go to a conference and you've asked your manager to sign off on a training request and he says no, then you quit bringing him requests for conferences. And that's not what you need to do. You need to go back and either revise your proposal, you need to look for a more appropriate conference or one closer that's going to cost less, but don't take no as an absolute and don't take it as a personal. Anytime someone says no, it could mean no right now, no today, or I need to talk to you about this next week, not right now, because I'm busy. So that was one of their biggest differences, is men usually take no as a challenge to get a yes instead of seeing it as a final answer. So be careful, don't make assumptions just because you didn't get the answer you wanted. So the last one that's got some really great anecdotes and some really interesting advice is from Arlene Dickinson from the Dragon's Den. So she's written a book called Persuasion. And her main focus is every conversation can be seen as a pitch. You pitch to your boss when you want to do something and you need his backing. You pitch to a manager that you want them to support your idea for your project. You pitch to a new employer that you want to hire you and take a chance on you. You pitch to clients. Everything can be seen as a pitch. You just have to figure out how to pitch to that certain person, what it is they want out of it, what it is you want out of it. So she's got a lot of great advice there about making personal connections and personal relationships, that once you've done that, it makes it a lot easier. That once you've already connected with that person, then getting into details and work is easier. So trying to find common ground and common connections, whether it's through charity work that you both support, or the fact that you both have kids in a certain soccer league. So trying to find personal connections. Not sure, do we have the internet? Probably not. Okay. So I'll just put this slide up. So someone that's really well known and has a lot of things on the YouTube or TED Talks is Sheryl Sandberg. So she's currently working for Facebook as this Chief Operating Officer, and she's previously been at Google. So she's got very high profile jobs. Before that, she worked, I believe it was with the Treasury of the United States. So she's got a lot of great advice and a lot of key topics that she wants to talk about, and she gives you can find really short little 2-minute videos, or you can find like hour-long ones where she talks about things she's seen or things she's learned through her career and what she has to say about women in profession and women in high-profile careers and management positions. So, as a wrap-up, my conclusion is you always need to be able to share ideas. You can only implement a great idea if you can actually communicate it to the rest of your team and get them on board. So the main focus is you need to still be yourself. You need to be your best self, and you need to be assertive and confident, but you still have to be yourself. That's it. Any questions?